Well, welcome. I hope we've started. My name is Bill Gallen. I am a docent, a tour guide here at the Figge, and I will be your host this evening for our introduction to our February, fingers crossed, for America exhibit. First, I would like to remind you that through these uncertain times, the Figge continues to bring art and people together, both on site and through our virtual museum. And tonight, we ask for your support to continue our mission of bringing art and people together through innovative ways with our community's health and safety in mind. You can make a donation by adding your gift to the chat room or go to mightycause.com Figge, for which we will share a link in that chat room. Now tonight, your gift will be matched dollar for dollar up to $5,000, thanks to the generosity of Tom and Jennifer Figge. Also, make sure to bid on the Figge website for one of the great auction items, including a chance to adopt one of the works which will be in the For America exhibit. That's our second major exhibition. That'll be Paul Ruzicka's The End of the Hurricane. Possibly you can name it, post-derecho. After the presentation by our guests, they will respond to your questions for about 10 minutes. And you may at any time note questions or comments by clicking on the word chat at the bottom of your screen. Key in your question under To All Panelists, hit return. I will receive it and I will pose as many questions as time permits. But first, let's hear from Figge Executive Director and CEO, Michelle Hargrave.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hargrave, and I'm Executive Director and CEO of the Figge Art Museum. I would like to welcome you to our 15th anniversary celebration. A special thank you to our sponsors and partners who made our anniversary celebration possible. I would also like to thank all of you. Because of strong support from our community over the past 15 years, the Figge has become a place where people of all backgrounds gather to learn, share, grow, connect, relax, and play. We're the cultural anchor of the Quad Cities, and last year we served over 86,000 people. We are proud to enrich the lives of those in our region now and to help build a stronger tomorrow through art education and outreach programs at the museum, in our schools, in the community, and online through our virtual museum. The Figge offers 17 special exhibitions each year, bringing world-class artwork from all around the world to the Quad Cities. And we have amassed an impressive art collection of over 4,000 works of Mexican colonial, Haitian, European, and American art. As we developed the programming for the 15 days of our 15th anniversary, we created events that celebrate some of the highlights of our educational programming, exhibitions, acquisitions, and collaborations with artists over the years. We also looked ahead to our next major exhibition, For America, Paintings from the National Academy of Design, which will open on February 20th, 2021. This exhibition will tell the story of a developing America and American identity and the evolution of art and artists within our country through the oldest artists' honorary society in the U.S., the National Academy of Design. For America will consist of over 90 works by renowned American artists such as Frederick Edwin Church, Celia Bow, Winslow Homer, William Merritt Chase, John Singer Sargent, Andrew Wyeth, and many more. I am thankful to all of you for your support and for joining us tonight. I know you will enjoy this special program, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Michelle. And now to our presenters. Diana Thompson is the Director of Collections at the National Academy of Design. In addition to co-curating for America, Diana oversees the NAD's 8,000 works of American art and architecture. She recently started inventorying and digitalizing the entire collection. When done, this online resource will include archival materials, biographies, and video documentation about the Academy's membership, its history, and of course, its artworks. Our other guest this evening, Jeremiah William McCarthy, is the curator of the National Academy of Design. Before joining the Academy, he was an associate curator of the American Federation of Arts, where he organized 2 national shows, including Women Artists in Paris, 1850 to 1900, for which he was awarded Best Painting Show of 2018 by the Boston Globe. Prior to that, he worked in both the curatorial and the education department at the Metropolitan Museum, the Solomon Guggenheim Museum, and the Frick Collection. Well, now remember, if you'd like to use that chat box, do that for questions and comments. And now, Diana and Jeremiah.
Well, hi there, everyone. We're so thrilled to be here tonight, and thank you to Michelle, to Sarah, and to you, Bill, as our host, and to everyone else at the Figge Art Museum. We're really thrilled and excited to have the show coming to you in February, and we were really honored to be asked to come and do this kind of behind-the-scenes talk about our thoughts about the show, how it came about, walk you through some of the thoughts and concepts and themes. But before we jump into the show, we thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of a background on the National Academy. So I'll let Jeremiah start the presentation.
Wait, what's your cocktail?
No.
It's called cocktail something.
It's a vodka martini. I hope everyone has a cocktail or mocktail in hand. Should be a fun night.
I'm drinking a Negroni because I thought it was vaguely patriotic thread. I need a white and a blue drink too. Okay, so let me start. Okay, yes, so the founding of the National Academy. I guess before we even talk about the show, we should tell you a little bit about what the National Academy of Design is. So the National Academy of Design was founded in 1825, and it was founded by Samuel Morse and a group of very young kind of upstart artists. And you have to think that right before the National Academy was founded, the 2 other academies, so the American Academy, which was in New York, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, they predate the National Academy, but they were basically founded by wealthy businessmen, politicians, people who kind of, their main goal was public edification, kind of like to create a space for art, but artists felt like they were left out of the debate. And kind of like very famously, we don't know a lot of the truth of these stories because the people who recount the stories have very vested interests. And kind of, there's really like no objective chronicler of this. It's either people who are like starting the National Academy and dead set on it starting, and then people from the American Academy incredibly opposed to it. And so there's this famous story of 2 American artists in New York being turned away from the cast, the antique cast that the American Academy had. And so what you're looking at, the portrait on the right, is this man, John Trumbull, who at that time in 1825 was older. And he was from an older generation of artists. And he kind of famously said, tell those artists that gentlemen built this academy. And kind of this like galvanized them. It was like the final, in the series of straws that broke the camel's back, this was like one of the final ones. And so this group of people got together and they said, okay, if we don't have access to casts, we are going to draw ourselves. We'll take it upon ourselves to sketch, and we'll learn this ourselves. We're going to do this ourselves. And so they would get together a couple of nights a week, and they would sketch by candlelight. And there are all these stories, you know, I mean, there's parts to, they wanted reconciliation, and basically there were, you know, it continues and continues. And I have a friend who says, or someone, I have read this somewhere, every good story begins with either a fight or a fire. And this one kind of has both. You know, it starts with this famous fight between Samuel Morse and John Trumbull. And then basically the National Academy of Design kind of takes off, and eventually they take all the students from the older academy. And then kind of sadly, the older academy, after all of its dwindling numbers, they had a fire and they lost they lost a lot. John Trumbull lost his studio, and they end up losing the casts, and they sell them, and the National Academy is the only place that buys them. And so, you know, it's a bit of a back and forth, but I think the point of it was self-governance. You know, it was about this group of people who kind of took it upon themselves to say, you know, no one but artists should be telling artists the tools they need to succeed. And I think that's kind of, the story is really complicated, and it has like an old beggar woman in the park that gives a note, and of all this intrigue and this back and forth. But I think ultimately the story, it was about a group of people who said, you know, we should be telling ourselves, we should be educating ourselves. It's a very American story, I think, about self-governance.
So the next slide you're looking at, actually on the left, shows some of the casts that Jeremiah was just talking about. And we wanted to show these two pictures because it's really in these founding years of the Academy in the early to mid 19th century, when the institution really begins to formalize its structure, and it becomes this tripartite institution that consists of this honorary association of artists and architects, our national academicians, the annual exhibition, and a school of fine arts. And these two images of classrooms provide a perfect example or demonstrate what the education of the Academy School revolved around. And that was working from the antique, and then a little bit later on, working from live models. And this structure really has continued well into the 20th century. And if you want to go to the next slide, Jeremiah. I also wanted to mention the importance of the annual exhibition because it plays a huge role in the history of the Academy. So this is a depiction from Harper's Weekly from 1882. And it really shows, you know, the fair and the fashionable of New York City going to visit one of the annual exhibitions. And, you know, this was in the 19th century, it really was the place to show American art. It was the who's who of American art. It helped launch and promote things like the Hudson River School, and continued to play a role in the Academy's existence up until today. So now we want to kind of jump into what this talk is about, the artwork, the collection. So this kind of we've just tried to lay a basic groundwork at this point for what the structure of this very complex institution is. So over the almost 200 years of the history of this place, we have been amassing a very large and unique collection of art.
Yeah, and so we're kind of unique in that sense because we don't purchase art. You know, other institutions and museums, it's curators and committees and museum professionals who purchase work for the institution. But all of our art is given by the artists or the architects themselves, by the members. And so what we're showing you here is the diploma presentation of Emanuel Leutze. And it's reported that he didn't do this from life. He didn't do it from George Washington. He did it from a bust of George Washington by Houdon, but he gave this as his diploma presentation. And it's a study I hesitate to call it a study because it's such an extraordinarily beautiful work. But it's for a very large painting called Washington Crossing the Delaware, which is at the Metropolitan. And here you have Emanuel Leutze's diploma presentation of Worthington Whitridge. So this is how our collection is built. There are these two rules. There's an artist when they're nominated to National Academician, which you'll see NA as you go through the exhibition. And that starts from 1825 and it's to today. And it's when you're nominated to that, you have your diploma work, which is a representative example of your practice. So whatever that may be. And then from a couple of years after the founding until 1994, there was a second rule in place, which was your associate portrait. So when you were nominated to that rank, you either had to give a self-portrait or you had to have someone depict you. And that could be a painting, it could be a sculpture, it could be an engraving. And I should say too, in the beginning, there were really 4 categories of membership. It was painting, sculpture, architecture, and engraving. And now we just have visual artists and architects. So we can have all different kinds of works. But I think this is a beautiful, absolutely beautiful portrait. And what's kind of fascinating too is Worthington Whitridge actually served as the model along with the bust for the profile of George Washington. So it's kind of fascinating. I think you can see when you look at the work, there's a little there's a little similarity in this area.
So yeah, so we also thought it was absolutely important to point out that the collection not only consists of paintings, but we have, as Jeremiah has mentioned, we have architects, we have sculptors, we have engravers. When we change the categories to just visual arts and architecture, that allows all sorts of contemporary trends in from, video art, performance art, mixed media, all of that. But we chose to organize this exhibition around the paintings because it was a way to really honor the founders. So out of the 30 founding members of the National Academy, more than half of them were painters. So we then set forth to build this exhibition with the paintings that would really show an alternate history of American art, and one that has largely been overlooked. And it's essentially an alternate history of modernism. So once we knew that that's what we were going to do and we had the content, okay, how do we tell this story? So then we had to think about how can we best convey this? And that led us to this idea, this notion of pairs. So I'll let Jeremiah talk about the first type of pairs.
Well, the first type of pairing is kind of what I was explaining before, where you have the artist diploma work and then their diploma portrait. So I think this is a perfect example of, we were kind of looking for when you put the two paintings together, they had this sort of spark or this magic. And this is George Tooker's Voice 2 from 1972. And if you know George Tooker's work, this is very quintessential George Tooker. A lot of people in silence and alienated spaces. And I mean, I love this work because in a way, it plays with you a little bit as a viewer. You don't know if it's one person sort of split psychologically between these two portions, or you don't know if it's a twin. But so this is what he submitted as his work, which is a very representative work. And here is his diploma portrait. And when you put the two works together, you start to notice Tooker's hand resting over that ledge, and the works really start to toy with painting and reality in a way that I think becomes really compelling. you know, George Tooker, like late in his life, he said something, he said, you know, every time I paint, it's like I pop open, when you look at my paintings, it's like you're basically popping open my head and looking inside. And I think with this pair, you get something of that. You know, you realize that George Tooker was another character in a George Tooker painting, which is something kind of fascinating to think about. And if you look through his body of work, you'll see he actually paints himself into numerous works. And I like that sort of like generative friction between the two.
So yeah, so then that brings us to the second type of pairing that we focused on, and that's these ahistorical pairings of paintings that are from, you know, sometimes decades apart. And they really allow us to trace this trajectory and this lineage of representational figurative painting that you'll see throughout the whole show. And through certain paintings, you'll see that certain artistic tropes are repeated time and time again. And this pairing is, I think, just so fascinating. On the left is a portrait of Eliza Greatorex. She was a well-known engraver in her time. It's not a self-portrait, it's by Ferdinand Thomas Lee Boyle. And then on the right, we have a Will Barnett self-portrait. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Will's work. But it's just, you look at these two together and these unbelievably uncanny similarities in just the formal composition of, you know, the artist kind of with this 3/4 turn. They have their stylus in hand, their sketchbook in hand, and they're ready to set out depicting the world through their eyes. And we found this, so you will see these ahistorical pairs throughout the show. But this one was particularly striking, that we have often at some of the different venues that it's been to so far, have chosen to either open the show with it and sometimes close the show with it. So I just wanted to show an installation shot where you see on the right-hand side of the screen where we've paired the two at the start of the show. And this is at the Society of the Four Arts in Palm Beach, Florida, which just closed a little early, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but was there, had opened in February. And I think that, you know, whether you look at this pair at the beginning or the end, I think it really kind of sensitizes the viewer to maybe even go back again and look at things a little differently. So you'll see some more in our talk of these ahistorical pairings, which are they're just incredibly fascinating, because it's showing you that over decades, artists are grappling with some of the same issues over and over again. And I think it's, you know, you don't often see works paired in that way. So we thought that that was a really, really interesting and important way to pair some of these.
Something, I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking something I find really fascinating too is they're not paintbrushes. You know, they're paintings, but they actually are showing you drawing. Like they're showing you sort of like the elements of painting, which also leads me to realize that I never explained our name of our institution and why we're called the National Academy of Design. So when we were founded, design meant something really different back then. You know, these were the arts of design as against the fine arts, which included like landscaping and theater. They believed that painting, sculpture, engraving, and architecture were a separate thing. You know, they all required drawing or design as it's sort of like as the foundation. Oh, and then, you know, after we started assembling these pairs and thinking about how we had limited it to paintings, we thought to ourselves, well, how can we include current National Academicians? How can we include architects? How can we include photographers? How can we show and illustrate that this is a living history, that you know, it's from 1825 to the present day and it's thriving. And so we invited current National Academicians to choose works and to comment on them. So if you look at the catalog, you'll see there are these single-page essays printed with works. And as you go through the exhibition, you'll see that they wrote some of the interpretation that accompanies the paintings. And I'm putting this up because, you know, on the left, you have Albert Bierstadt's On the Sweetwater near Devil's Gate. And this depicts an area in Wyoming that was a fur trading post. And so there's some speculation about whether he painted it from life or whatnot. But it's not depicting the Hudson River, but it's of that, the feeling is still there to sort of depict the American landscape, the great West, you know, the great unexplored. And so Joan Quick to See Smith, an American Indian artist, chose this work to comment on. And she says, you know, in 1855, just 5 years before this was painted, the Hell Gate Treaty was signed, which basically gave away this area. It didn't give away, it took from American Indians, Wyoming, Idaho, a bit of Canada. And she says, you know, my ancestors basically were forcibly resettled. And I think that, you know, when you read this, it's kind of, it just reminds you that what we call American art means many different things to many different people. And that, you know, not everybody sees the same thing when they look at the same image. And so we wanted to kind of, we couldn't predict that people would write in comments like that. But we didn't want to edit them or censor them, and we wanted to have that be the lens for you to view the work. So when you go into the exhibition, you can look at the work and you can experience it on its own, and then you can see her text alongside it. And I think there, as you go through the exhibition, you'll see there are these really interesting dialogues that happen. And so this, now we've entered the kind of the part of the presentation where we would just give you a little overview of the exhibition and what you'll see when you come to the exhibition. So the exhibition really starts with the Hudson River School. It starts with what is promoted by the Academy and promoted in America. It's even, the paintings are even sent abroad. It's really one of the first sort of styles of American art. And here you see Asher Duran's self-portrait. You know, after the death of Thomas Cole, who's kind of the founder of the father of the Hudson River School and its founder, Asher Durand, Thomas Cole dies very young. And so Asher Durand is basically asked to kind of like carry on this tradition, carry on this mantle. And I think that, you know, this is him when he's in his early 30s. And I think you sort of, I think you see a little bit of that in the painting. You see this kind of seriousness, this, this desire to be a professional artist, you know, to kind of like be an elder statesman for the community. And then in the painting that we've paired it with, I think it's really beautiful because this is painted only like 2 or 3 years after the death of Thomas Cole. And while it's very tempting to read this as sort of a meditation on their great friendship, as you see these two artists kind of surveying the Hudson, the Upper Catskills, it's a little tempting, but there's no letter, there's no, I don't know, Diana, if you found anything, but there's no, I don't know, there's no answer to it, sort of. But I love this painting because it is actually showing, it's a painting that illustrates how a painting is made. You know, it's a painting that illustrates interpretation and how you look at the world around you and you translate that into your art. And you see this artist gesturing with a maul stick, which was this thing you would kind of balance your wrist on as you would write, as you would sketch, or as you would paint. And he's kind of gesturing to the landscape. And I think it's really beautiful. It almost looks like he's teaching this man, kind of passing along this history. While I said it's tempting. See, I'm already reading into the painting. And then alongside the Hudson River School, you also have the beginnings of genre painting. So here we picked this Winslow Homer pairing because everybody loves Winslow Homer. And I mean, I love this little jewel of a painting. It's a croquet player. It's one of only a handful, and it's probably the earliest of the croquet series. And it's a jewel, it's a little jewel. But I think sometimes Winslow Homer, the name, becomes this disembodied thing where you're kind of like it's like a billboard almost, or it's like a brand name. And I think when you see this portrait, it humanizes him in a way, in addition to having an incredible mustache, which I didn't know that he had. But I think it's sort of, it points to another reason why these portraits are so valuable, which is they have a documentary element. Like, this was actually painted from life. And the other thing is, for a very long time, this wasn't on display, and it was in terrible, terrible, terrible condition when we found it. We actually weren't really sure if it could be fixed. But today, when you go and you see the exhibition, you'll see it's really lovely. Oh, and this is the second, so you should talk about this.
Yeah, so this brings us into kind of the second section of the exhibition, which we've called A New Internationalism. And it's really covering the latter part of the 19th century, when all of these artists who had gone abroad to study in these great European art centers like Dusseldorf and Paris and London, they're coming back stateside, and they're bringing with them all these ideas about art and about pedagogy. And this not only influences American art, but it certainly has a huge impact on the Academy, on its collection and what we're seeing in these works, and also on the school and the instruction that happened in the school. So here on the left, we have what I think is probably a pretty iconic and well-known painting. William Whittemore painting his very good friend, who they studied together in Paris, painting his very good friend, Charles Courtney Curran. And it's really this archetypal image of the American artist studying in Paris. He's at the Louvre, he's copying from a classical statue. And then on the right, we wanted to point out this, I think, really kind of wonderfully pensive picture by Wyatt Eaton in his studio in Paris. And this is one of the earliest, certainly in the exhibition, earliest depiction of the artist depicting themselves in their studio. And again, this is a theme that we see return over and over again in a lot of the works in the show. So then also in this section, we can certainly see the impact of various European artistic trends, and Impressionism is probably, I guess, the most well-known. So this is a really incredible, it's not an ahistorical pairing, it's an ahistorical trio, which is really, really great. So we have Frederick Carl Frieseke's work, Hollyhocks, on the left. He painted this in Giverny, where Monet made his home. In the middle, we have Childe Hassam, a leading figure of the artist colony in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And of course, we can see the influence of Impressionism on that. And then remarkably, this work on the right that's made, nearly a century later by this artist, Walter Hatke. And you can really see how he connects to this lineage over 100 years almost in his handling of the paint, and certainly in his handling of the light. And he's just an incredible artist, still working today, and encourage everyone to look into him more. He's a really sweet man.
And we should say too, at almost every venue, people like whoever is unpacking and whoever, like during the install, this is kind of always the painting that people have commented on it, kind of like everybody's doing their work or whatever. And then when this one comes out of the crate, it's kind of like, yeah, it's just, I mean, it's like light. Yeah. It's like, it's incredible. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yes. So then another thing what?
Iconic.
Yes. Speaking of iconic, another thing that two very iconic works in this section reveal, and I think also allow the viewer to look at these iconic works in a new way, is when you think about the interpersonal relationships that existed among many of the members across generations, throughout the whole history of the Academy. And that's certainly true with these two artists, William Merritt Chase and Robert Bloom. They were great friends. They traveled throughout Europe together in the 1880s. They often depicted one another. If you want to go to the next slide, Jeremiah. And they actually were even elected to the Academy as Associate National Academicians in the same year. So, you know, in his time, Chase was often criticized for maybe a lack of empathy in some of his subjects. But I think you can see in this portrait that he does of his friend Robert Bloom that that's not at all the case. It's a very, I think, endearing and sweet and personal depiction of his good friend. So again, this is just another example of a way where when we pair certain paintings, these relationships emerge, whether it's a good friendship or it's a teacher and a student. And this is something that, again, gets repeated throughout the course of the exhibition.
Oh, and so now we're kind of, this is the third section of the exhibition, which is called Painting America. And during this time, like after the turn of the century, 10s, 20s, and 30s, there is this real impulse, this real initiative within the Academy where they say to themselves, you know, for so long we have been a New York-centric institution. The membership body lives within, you know, 10 blocks of each other. So if we're going to call ourselves the National Academy of Design, not the New York Academy of Design, we actually have to try. And so they make, they have just this broad initiative to reach out to various art colonies and to kind of open up the membership base. And so here, this is Daniel Garber, who is one of the most important painters of the New Hope School of Pennsylvania Impressionism, and an incredible teacher. And so this is his self-portrait from 1911, and then the same year he painted, it's about 1911, and then the same year he painted this landscape, which would become his diploma portrait. And I remember when we were talking about this painting actually when we were putting the exhibition together, because we were kind of struck at how hip he looks.
Mm-hmm.
Like he
could be a Brooklyn hipster.
Yeah, he has the same haircut as, you know, as a young guy in Brooklyn. And then we should also say too, I mean, he was so young. He's the first to win the Julius Hargarten Prize, I think, which was
which was for promising artists under 35. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, even here, he's so young, but you can tell it's like something's going on with this, like the way that he's painted himself. It's like he knows something that maybe you don't know. And of course, with Taos, New Mexico, that was one of the areas that we wanted to kind of flesh out through the exhibition. And here's Mary Shepard Green Blumenshine, who's actually a New Yorker from Brooklyn, and she married Ernest Blumenshine. They got together in Paris, and then eventually they came back. They came back to the States, and he went to Taos, and he fell in love with Taos, with the landscape. And she didn't want to go. She never wanted to go. And there are like these photos and these stories of her in her Parisian couture, like fully decked out with their car stranded, and just like this woman completely out of place, and she really didn't like it. And then eventually she loved it, and her art really changes. But they're another fascinating couple because unlike a lot of the relationships that happen in this time period and at the end of the 19th century, she was famous when they got together. You know, she's the second American woman after Mary Cassatt to place at the Salon in Paris. And, you know, I mean, even her mother was like, he's not good enough for you. You shouldn't marry him and whatnot. And she, I mean, I think in this portrait, you can really see that she was a personality, and she had really strong ideas and strong opinions. And, you know, I mean, they fell in love, and you do things for love, and she ended up liking it. And then so we're also, you know, Taos remains this incredibly inspirational area for artists. And so here, this painting in the center is called North of Taos, and it's by Al Kresh. And, you know, I think you can sort of see how inspiring the landscape can be. And we wanted to show a detail of this painting because it's just like, it's like ice cream. It's so lush. It's just, it's really extraordinary. And then the other main satellite that we wanted to point out being Monhegan Island in Maine. And so on the left, you have Robert Henry's portrait of Bellows, and on the right, you have Bellows's three rollers. And they're both painted in 1911 when they took a trip together to Monhegan Island. And one of the scholars who wrote for the catalog, Kimia Shahai, she ended up identifying this quote, which I think is really great, when you put it next to these two paintings, because it's written by Henry and it says, take a face or the sky and don't paint them as they are, paint them as they were when they were most beautiful to you. And I kind of love that, because it's like, he's still not saying don't paint them. He's still saying paint representational things, but representation with your own viewpoint, your own vantage. And then we wanted to show a Hawaiian artist, Ruben Tam, that we are lucky enough to have a few paintings by. And he paints Monhegan in 1974. And being from Hawaii, he kind of found in this island something of his home. And I think when you put the three paintings together, we've displayed them a few times, kind of like with two together and the one off, so that you can kind of see these same sites, these same ideas kind of get interpreted and reinterpreted through time. Oh, and this is...
So then this now brings us into the next section, which we've called post-war realisms. And it really shows how realism in all of its various incarnations really remained a viable alternative to abstraction, American abstraction in the mid-20th century, and also shows the Academy's continuing support of that realist figurative tradition. And it's also in this section, which is our 4th out of 5 sections, where we start to see an America that looks like the America we know today. So before I talk about these paintings, I think we felt it was very important to recognize the fact that, an academy by its nature is an exclusionary organization. And there have been times throughout the history of the institution where they have been, resistant to change in many different forms. I mean, just for instance, Jeremiah mentioned earlier, there was a period of time where members were only elected in from the New York City area and its immediate surrounding vicinity, until it started to spread out across the country to these art colonies and satellite communities. It wasn't until 1992 that the institution elected its first female president. So there are these realities that we feel are important to point out. So this brings me to this incredible pairing. These are works by Huey Lee Smith. So Huey Lee Smith was in 1967 elected he was elected as the second African-American artist to the National Academy. And it was 40 years prior to that Henry Ossawa Tanner had broken that barrier and became the first African-American artist elected to the Academy. And for Henry Ossawa Tanner's portrait requirement, he actually had a friend and colleague paint it for him. So Huey Lee Smith's self-portrait here is the first self-portrait by an African-American artist to enter our collection. And that was in 1966. And, when doing research on Huey Lee Smith, we read that he felt that his election to the National Academy was the greatest achievement of his career. So, you can imagine the pressure, but also a feeling of being proud and pressure when he's thinking about what he's going to submit and what he's painting. And I think then you look at his diploma work, The Bridge, which again, this image doesn't do it justice. It's just stunning in real life. And it's somewhat mysterious, but when you look at the time at which it was painted and you think about what's going on in our country, several things have come to mind for me. We don't really know exactly what it's about, but, just a few years earlier, there was the march from Selma to Montgomery over the bridge. Also, maybe a bridge could mean for him this hopeful bridging of people, of communities, you know. So I think it was a very interesting pairing, not only just for our collection, but I think for American art, really. So Jeremiah, if you want to go to the next one. This was another really important pairing with a really interesting story that we wanted to highlight. So these are by Charles White, one of the best known African-American artists of the 20th century. And the work on the right, entitled Matriarch, this is what he chose to submit as his portrait requirement, rather than submit a likeness of himself. And this depicts his great aunt, Hasty Baines. She was born into slavery in 1857 in Ridgeland, Mississippi. And when we were researching White, we found in his artist file this letter that was penned by his wife shortly after his death, where she clearly explains the important role that Hasty Baines played for White in his life, and explained how he saw her as a symbol of courage and beauty and wisdom. And when that is then paired, I mean, it's powerful enough that he chose to give this as his portrait. And then when you pair that with his more mature work on the left that he gave as his diploma work, this does not depict an actual person, but rather a personification, again, of courage. It's just an incredibly powerful pairing. Again, thinking about what's going on in our country at the time that these works are being made, anything from the civil rights movement to the Vietnam War to all of that. And then another great story that we wanted to share about Matriarch, if you could go to the next one.
Something I was just going to say about this too, that you kind of reminded me, I also think this as a pairing, it really allows you to see inside a painter's mind in a way, because you see in the earlier painting, he takes these ideals of dignity and wisdom and grace, and he puts them into a portrait that is depicting an individual, you know, an individual life. But then you see, as he develops his mature style and he starts to paint figures that become like these allegorical representations of the same ideas, you see him kind of translate this from the personal to a more universal language. And I think it's a really incredible pair, because you don't often get to see that. You know, you get to see one or the other and you make your mind up about their practice. But I think that this, it's a very valuable pair in the exhibition in terms of what it kind of can show you about how a painter operates and how they think.
Yeah. And this, we wanted to take the opportunity to share the fact that this exhibition, not only organizing it, but also at times throughout its tour so far, we have had the opportunity to conserve a lot of works from the collection. And this is one that we were both just so excited about. You know, this work was given in 67. I don't think it was ever shown after it was submitted. So was it shown once?
Yeah, to my knowledge, it was shown once.
It was shown once. Okay, so when we are culling through storage, looking for paintings, trying to decide what we want to put in the show, we come across this and we're like, this looks like it could be incredible. We need to try to fix this. So we enlisted a conservator who was fantastic and explained to us what the problem was. It's this, it's a rather typical problem called efflorescence, where the fats in the oil paint will rise to the surface and it'll create this kind of white film over the, it's similar to like the film that you would see develop over like a chocolate bar. It's a little challenging to remove, but she did this incredible job. And I think you can see the comparison, these beautiful jewel-like tones that come out. Again, an image on the screen is not going to do it justice until you see it in person, but these beautiful tones in the background and the highlights of her face. And again, this is just one of the, Jeremiah had mentioned the Homer portrait. It's just one of many that we've been so fortunate to be able to conserve for this show. And, oh, and here is it's a really lovely installation shot showing those two works together along with the pairing of our Tookers. And this is where the show, this is an installation shot from the Dixon Gallery and Gardens in Memphis, Tennessee, and that's where the show is currently hanging.
And we should say the Kirschenbaum too. That was a painting. When we first saw it, I mean, there was text that we couldn't see. There was so much that was behind all of this varnish and oxidation and chalk. And then, I mean, this doesn't do it justice, but you can see that the painting is sort of glimmering and glinting. And then, so this takes you to the final, this is the final room, kind of the final space of the exhibition. And, you know, like Diana said earlier, I think this is the part where you can really see, like, this is an America that looks a little bit more representative, like the America that we have today, rather than the America of the past. You'll start to see that even though people still paint the figure and they are employing this tradition and they're engaging with this tradition, it becomes content-based. You know, they start like responding to the world around them. And I love this pair because it's not technically a pair, it's just two paintings that we have that allow you to see something that our collection, that's unique to our collection. So on the left, you have May Stevens. This was her diploma presentation, which depicts herself in the center with Benny Andrews, who was a very good friend of hers, a very good friend of her husband. And she, this is called the Big Daddy series, where she would take these kind of paper doll constructions and they would represent various systems of power. You know, your father, the police, the army, like all these things that kind of structure manhood, and they kind of form this backdrop. And I'm absolutely over the moon with the way that she paints Benny Andrews. It's almost like, I mean, it's almost like biblical, this gesture of kind of blessing or stop, peace and reflection. And just, I love the engagement with all the figures. And then when Benny Andrews joined, he gave us his diploma presentation, a self-portrait, which was no longer required. But he gave this portrait, and you can see he's a little bit older, so it kind of allows you to trace his life. But I think that he also depicts, it's called collagist, and this idea that that you can fashion yourself, you know, that like in a way, through paint and through art, you can make and remake yourself over time. And I think that that was something that you'll see in a lot of his art. And I just think it's really beautiful that they're usually hung in two different sections, and the Benny Andrews is of the final section, but how these paintings start to hark back. Oh God. Okay, and then this, this is a pair. So this is by an artist, Whitney Savage. And I remember the first time we saw this painting ever in storage, I could not stop thinking about it for like a week or 2 weeks. And I stopped when we were doing, you know, because we were going kind of rack by rack and we were doing our inventory and we were looking for certain paintings. And this was just something that I don't want to say haunted me, but moved me really deeply. And I didn't know why. And it's his diploma work, and it's called Endangered Bobby. And eventually his family, I ended up asking his family, what perhaps is this painting about? And it depicts his cousin, Bobby Kelly, who ended up dying. And I think that this is something also that's unique to our collection. You get a lot of paintings and works of art that mean something very personal to the person who gave them. And I think that that is true for Huey Lee Smith. I think that's true for May Stevens. I think that's true of so many of the artists in this exhibition. And then his self-portrait, it's so good. I mean, what is he even doing? Is he on the floor? Has something fallen? And then he has these little glasses, which come up in a lot of his paintings as like this little nod to James Joyce. But I just think it's so incredible. I mean, look at that still life. It's like, that knife's like Cezanne or something. And then it's called Self-Portrait with Narragansett Beer, as if like the beer is the focal point of this exhibition.
Or he fell off his chair while drinking Narragansett Beer.
Yeah. What we'll be doing soon, I guess. And then we just wanted to show you that a lot of people, like Joan Quick to See Smith, for example, engage in this portraiture tradition, although they're no longer required to. And I just love that in the final room, there are a handful of self-portraits by women artists. And I put together an exhibition on women artists, and you'll see in a lot of self-portraits by women artists of the 19th century, it's all the trappings. Like they've got the painter's apron on, the palette, like everything. And it's all of these kind of symbols of legitimacy. And as they're trying to depict themselves very legitimately, their peers like Manet and other art and Courbet, they're depicting themselves kind of wild and as dandies. And it's like these women artists are buying into a system that's kind of crumbling around them because they've been kept out of it for so long. And when you stand in the final room, you see these incredibly strong and formidable self-portraits by women. And for example, with Rosemary Beck, like she's got all the trappings of the studio around her, but that gaze and that like incredible piercing engagement with you as a viewer, and then you don't get to see what she's painting. It's kind of like, there's a real freedom in the creativity that's on display. And I think the same is true with Joan Quick-to-See Smith, where you see Durer's rabbit, you see all of these kind of trappings of art history, but it's a art history that they have created for themselves and a usable past that they have continued, and they've very consciously cast some things aside. Yeah, and then we wanted to end with the earliest and the latest paintings in the exhibition. And I just love, I love this Peter Saul self-portrait. Like, what's not to, it's like, who would ever depict themselves like this? Like, or who would choose to depict themselves like this? But this idea that Peter Saul has such an unflinching, relentless criticism and critique of the world around him, and that extends to his own portrait. You know, like he's just as blisteringly critical of himself as he is of the world around him, with these like crazed glasses and these big potato teeth. And then you have, and this is a very misleading comparison because the Morse is only 3 inches high and this Peter Saul is 60 inches high. But you have Samuel Morse, when he's not even 20 years old, painting his self-portrait on ivory. And it's fascinating because he's not depicting himself as a miniaturist on ivory. He's depicting himself with a palette as a painter. And I just love these kind of bookends.
Yeah, and again, the similar formal composition.
Oh, and then go buy the book. No.
Great.
We come with props too.
Okay, so that's our talk. Thank you so much for listening to that, and of course we're open to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You guys, amazing. That was just wonderful. Yes, I can't believe you finished with that pairing. That Peter Saul makes so much more sense to me now that I see it next to the Morse. I don't know what that says, but terrific. I want to make sure I get in. I'm going to bring up the chat room and just tell you that you're getting lots of rave reviews, and we want to have you crated up with the works in February and arrive here. Blah blah. Let's see. That has come up. Have you seen this exhibition change from venue to venue? I think you said that. Yes, it does. And I don't know if there's any quick comment you want to make about the most outrageous change you had to make in one of the venues.
Well, I could comment, and if Jeremiah wants to add. It certainly has changed, sometimes more drastically than others. For instance, at Dayton, where it opened, we wanted all 100 paintings there because they were celebrating their 100th anniversary. But then at times, for instance, at New Britain, there are times when when our show can complement the institution's own permanent collection, where we can try to point out connections there. At the Society of the Four Arts in Palm Beach, we actually did one of the sections as a salon hanging, which was really interesting. And currently at the Dixon, it's hung for the first time on the tour in a purely chronological order, which is the first time we've done that. but it's really interesting, and it allows us to see it in a different way too. So it has been tailored to each venue, if possible, you know, in whatever way complements the show and the venue as best as possible.
Your comments this evening are really going to be helpful to go back to and think about as our docents try to encourage conversation about these pieces as we go through the pairings is very helpful, of course. I'm sorry, Jeremiah.
No, I was just going to echo what Diana said, but I would really say for me, and I got a lot of feedback about the salon wall in Palm Beach, where we hung one whole wall from floor to ceiling with paintings, and we specifically chose pairs and divided them across the whole wall. And I think that when you stood in the space, you really got this sense of artists looking to artists and this dialogue across time. And we did it with the section with Painting America, where you had views of Taos, you had views of Boston, you had views of Pennsylvania. And you really kind of got, I think, I don't want to say the truest, but I think you got a very palpable sense of how idiosyncratic and strange and wonderful our institution is, that people sort of engage in this tradition and they keep interpreting it and reinterpreting it. And I feel like for me, it was very revelatory to see it like that, especially those paintings.
You sound as flexible as Chinese gymnasts or something. I mean, that's wonderful. Couple of people are curious about how new members of the Academy are chosen now. I know the change in the early 1900s about the Constitution allowing, eliminating that rule about new members had to be in the previous year's exhibition. How are they chosen now?
It's the same. I mean, it's in the sense, it's the same as they were chosen by vote and by election. So every year we elect a new class, and every year academicians elect other academicians. And, you know, in a way, I think what's really extraordinary and beautiful about that is you can't solicit it. You can't, it's just really, truly a gesture of respect from your peers. And I love that it's this history that really you sort of see stretch out before you, and we've seen change. And now I think with how individuals are elected in, I think you'll really see that it's very representative in terms of age range and background and artistic practice. It's no longer just a painters club. And so, yeah.
Is it still an, and I'll screw this up, atelier system where each student is assigned to a master teacher throughout their stay?
Well, that was the case for a lot of the history, but I can't pinpoint when exactly, but in recent decades, the constitution and focus of the school began to shift a bit. And now we're in a new chapter where I think most people are aware of the fact that we sold our other buildings, we're going through a visioning strategic plan, and it remains to be seen what our education component of the institution will look like. But yeah, the atelier system was the system for, I'd say, the vast majority of the history.
Okay, wonderful. So I mean, the comments about so many of the artists are wonderful. Did you uncover any surprises for yourselves about certain works or certain artists that just kind of tripped your trigger, made you smile?
I mean, I have to say that Matriarch by Charles White was really something incredible for me. I mean, I've been looking at these works for many years, but I always still seem to find something new. And, you know, Jeremiah is fairly new at the collection, but we were like, you know, I think one I remember is Gretna Campbell and her landscape, which really struck Jeremiah, I thought, when he first saw it. And when I saw it, I thought, my God, I feel like I have never seen this work before. Why is that? So it's just, I think when you start looking at things through different lenses, you start to see things maybe in a different way, or things that you just had for some reason been blinded to.
Yeah.
So I think there were a lot of really wonderful discoveries, at least from my perspective.
You know,
I
go
think-
ahead, Jeremy.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's one of the, that was in a way like why it was so easy to work together in a sense, because I think you were, having worked with the collection for so long, you knew the collection in a very deep way, but then I was seeing it completely new. And so the things that I was attracted to were very different from what, you had kind of, from your favorites. And so we ended up having this very interesting checklist. But for me, it was Huey Lee Smith's self-portrait. I think that, and I have said that this isn't I think an artist said this, but like there's no model for how to deal with the model or to be the model. And this idea that he was the first of something, and all the kind of self-imposed criticism, everything that you put on yourself. And then if you look at the portrait, I think it's really moving, because at the end of the day, he's just a man there in the portrait. There's no canvas, there's no palette. It's just a guy looking back at you. And I think that equality and that dignity, it forces you to be empathetic with the portrait in a way that I think is very, I think we need a lot more of, quite frankly.
Well, it's great for a museum, you're a museum that tracks American history through these paintings. And I was thinking, what's next? What's going to really get you excited next? And I was thinking, that this idea of, our present political climate and social climate, does that continue to get addressed? And obviously it has, and hope that continues. I don't know what's next on NAD's list. Do you have new works coming in that you're pumped about?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. Almost every day, new diploma works come in.
Yeah, we've been through this kind of transitionary period. We still elect a class every year, still continue to get their diploma works in. And there's a real push, not just because of the current political landscape, but it's been an initiative, an important one for many years, to continue to increase the diversity of background, diversity of practice, diversity of age, all of it. So, we continue to strive for that.
I'm sure at some point later you can suggest some books that will help us as we go through this process. I hesitate to ask because I have a feeling that it's quite a large library in your minds, but that I'm sure our book club would be interested, and our viewers also. And whoever is doing your conservation work, I would like their number as my new dermatologist. That was really wonderful. Let me just double check before I cut you guys loose. Just more compliments, how wonderful you are. And okay, here we are. When we welcome visitors next February, what's the best opening line we can offer? What do you got?
For artists, by artists, and architects. But in this show specific, our motto, for artists and architects, by artists and architects. But I think for this show, for artists, by artists, that's what I'd say.
When we get on the other side of this COVID business and we're in New York, we can come visit and see some of the architecture also of part of your collection.
That's a hard thing too, because you think like, how do you acquire architecture?
Yeah, I know.
So the architects give drawings, preparatory sketches, models. So we have a lot of that, but we don't have any buildings.
I wasn't expecting a hotel, but that would be okay too if you set us up. Hey, thank you both so much. This has been wonderful. I've got a few things to close with for our group, and so before closing, I got to remind you to bid at our online auction that's been extended to August 21st. Artworks by former director Tim Schiffer, Ellen Wagner, and DDA William. Also, auction packages, including hosting 20 friends at the current hotel's up patio, or an outing club membership. Oh, they get a lot more. Also, upcoming virtual events include a John Deere headquarters art collection tour, a Caribbean cooking class, and if that is not enough, something called the Art of Beer. I'll go for the bourbon one. Once again, thanks to TerraStar, our sponsor, to Sarah Morby, the Figge Development Director, for her tech support tonight, and especially to all of you for attending.